views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines. This is Eric Lecain with World News Jam. We bring you the most interesting stories from around the world each week. We just don't give you the news, but we tell you the story behind the news, as well as read and answer your questions in an entertaining and easy to understand way. So please join us on DZRJ 810 AM Radio Bandito TV and get yourself updated with all the interesting news of the week from around the world right here on DZRJ's World News Jam.
Watch and listen to World News Jam every Sunday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandito.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio Bandito and RJTV Channel 224 on Sky Cable. My name is Eric Lecain, bringing you interesting news stories from around the world. Not only the news, but the story behind the news for those Filipinos that have an interest as to what's going on outside the country, beyond the borders, across the oceans, from the small Pacific paradise we call the Philippines. Now this week we take a look into the unending drama of U.S. politics and its trials and tribulations. Also the shocking news out of Russia and some insights on North Korea, what's going on with the ceasefire agreement in Israel, and a whole lot more. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. So let's get to it. Well, the big question in the U.S. as of today is, what does $355 million look like? Well, according to my math, it would cover 343 hectares if you laid the bills out end to end. And if you laid them end to end, it might get you a little less than halfway to Mars. In any case, it's a lot of cash. And if I had that much, I would for surely stop working. And I would never defraud a bank or overvalue my assets to get a bank loan, because the New York State Court might take my $355 million away. Just ask Donald Trump. This past Friday, Donald Trump was ordered to pay the state of New York $355 million as a punishment for defrauding the banks he borrowed money from. This particular case has been talked about for the last year, but for the last 11 weeks, we've watched it play out on court. Now, just to be clear, this is not one of Trump's many criminal trials. This is a civil trial, so no jail time. But honestly, if I had a choice between paying $355 million and doing a little jail time, might just do the jail time. Because $355 million is, and you know, a lot. But it won't even be that in the end. When you start to add in the interest, it will end up at around $450 million. This was not a jury trial. The reason being, Trump's lawyers opted out of a jury trial with all the evidence. It would have been even harder to convince a jury. But in the end, they couldn't convince this judge. The judge came down hard. Not only did Trump get a fine enough to fill a mountain with cash, he can't do business in the state of New York for 3 years, nor can his two sons for 2 years. By the way, the children, who are grown adults, will have to pay $4 million each. This trial, as we have been covering it here on the show, has been nothing but chaotic and sometimes on the edge of just crazy. The problems being that Trump won't stop talking. He's been very vocal both inside the court and outside in his personal attacks on the judge and his staff. Outside the court, Trump would make campaign-like speeches, sometimes going after the judge, calling him names, claiming he's of a Democratic plot against him. This is the same judge making the decision on how much he was going to have to pay. Of course, this led to multiple death threats being levied against the judge as well as his assistant, who they did a background research on and found a picture of her and a Democratic senator. claiming she must be part of the Democratic conspiracy against Trump. In the courtroom, Trump was even worse, trying to give speeches instead of answering simple questions, constantly saying how corrupt the judge is, and the prosecutor claiming the whole trial is put on by Joe Biden, the president. Of course, there is zero evidence of that claim, as this trial has nothing to do with the government or the presidency. It's a state civil trial. But that didn't stop Trump from claiming that this trial is, in his mind, maybe election interference, which ironically Trump is also on trial for in another state. But the biggest focal point of this trial, I guess, has to be the staggering amount Trump has been ordered to pay. Now, Trump said in his defense many times he did nothing wrong, that he borrowed money from the banks, paid it back, no harm, no foul. No one got hurt, no one lost out. So why should it even matter if he overinflated his assets? But the problem is, you break into someone's house and steal a bunch of stuff, but then say, well, the insurance covered it, so it's okay, no harm, no foul. I mean, Trump borrowed money, paid it back. But the amount he paid was based on the assessments of his assets, some of which were deemed as complete fabrications. You know, like saying your condo is 30,000 square feet when it's really 10,000, or a property is worth 20 million, but you say it's worth 400 million. The numbers he should have paid in interest were at least way off. And if you add up all the numbers he got out of paying, that supposedly adds up to $355 million. The judge gave the ruling based on the point that Trump and his kids showed no remorse in the case. They said basically everyone does this, so why can't we? In fact, even after there was the possibility of the trial, they continued the same scheme as if no one was watching them, very carefully, under a microscope. Even Trump had only said, sorry, judge, we won't do it again, but he wouldn't. He just continued to blast the judge, calling him corrupt and political. I mean, the evidence of guilt was never in doubt. However, the amount of the penalties is what the trial really came down to. The number reflects the lost profits of the bank. The judge found that Trump conspired with his own executives to violate state financial laws. In other words, they knew what they were doing. So the prosecutor, 𝗪cie𝗍𝗋, went after the amount that Trump should have had to pay in interest, and of course the violations to state law he broke. Now, Trump will be able to appeal this decision. However, and here's the kicker, the problem he will have in New York is the same as he has in his sexual abuse case. He also lost to the tune of $83 million. He will have to put up that money in order to appeal. This makes it so people can't just appeal for the sake of appealing. You know, during the time of the appeal, Trump can't hide all his money. There's also a state-appointed monitor that is placed into Trump's business to make sure he doesn't do anything shifty while the appeal is going on. But still, one thing many are asking, does Trump have $355 million or $450 million? No one in their right mind is going to give him a bond for that, are they? Maybe. Now, he has claimed he has $400 million in cash. No one can be sure if this is really true. Remember, he's also appealing the ruling on the rape trial, so add that on. So as he will need to find well over $500 million in order to appeal all these decisions. Now, many experts say that Trump most likely cannot get either of these rulings overturned on appeal, but really that may not even be the goal of Trump. He just needs to delay the appeals long enough until he might be able to win the election. Then as president, he can change the people that are prosecuting him and maybe make some kind of executive order such as your current president can no longer be sued for anything. But the one good thing Trump got out of this that the judge ruled on was it's only a 3-year suspension, not a lifetime ban from working in his company, which is what the prosecutor wanted. Even so, at some point, Trump is going to have to put up some assets to cover this bond or sell some of his high-ticket properties like a hotel or a golf club. But even to do that, remember, he has to go through the state-appointed monitor who is assigned to oversee Trump's business. So at this point, there's not a lot of holes that Trump can crawl through to get out of this one. And with all this, he still has something else to contend with: his criminal trials. Now, in those trials against Trump, the evidence is, how you might say, overwhelming, monumental, overpowering. You know, he looks guilty. So, Trump's best defense is something most people would have never thought of. Trump briefly said that because he was president in the past, no one should ever be able to prosecute him in the present, no matter what he's done. No matter if he tried to overthrow the government, stole classified documents, lied about money he paid to a porn star who spanked him with a rolled-up magazine before having sex just 3 months after his wife gave birth. Okay, on the porn star trial, having sex with Stormy Daniels is not what Trump has to contend with in the next coming weeks. It's not illegal to cheat on your poor wife just after your child was born. That's not what's illegal. What's illegal is paying off that porn star with money you listed as campaign expenses and then lying about it. Trump's lawyer, the one who paid off the porn star, went to jail for this. He paid off the porn star with checks signed by Donald Trump. I mean, there are recordings of Trump's phone calls between he and Michael Cohen, his lawyer. This looks like this will be the first criminal trial for us to watch and argue about, but unlike the most recent ones, this one's not about money. This is about deciding if a fraud that Trump committed can send him to jail. This is why it's important for Trump to delay these cases as much as possible. This is why, when the appeals court said that Trump is not immune to prosecution, the ex-president cannot commit any crime that they want to and get away with it, Trump went to the Supreme Court and said, "Come on, guys, do me a solid." He wants the Supreme Court to overturn the appeals court decision and to give him complete immunity from prosecution. Now, Trump is under civil lawsuits from the police officers that were hurt on January 6th, but Trump seems to have kind of given up on appealing those, and just letting the officers have the right to sue him. But the criminal trials are different. It seems what Trump wants to hopefully get is the Supreme Court to discuss this for as long as they want, or even longer, to drag this on as long as possible so that it spills into the presidential election, because if the Supreme Court does not take this case or rules against Trump, then Trump's only options to stay out of jail is to, number one, win all the trials, which at this point seems highly unlikely, or number two, win the election for president and just vacuum up this whole mess. And of course, the biggest question of all, if Trump loses any or all of these cases and goes to jail, but then wins the election, what do we do then? This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. It's Sunday evening, and it's our news wrap-up. Last week, Putin was in the news a lot because of his propaganda-type interview with Tucker Carlson, who seems to be in love with old V. Putin. But there was a related story I wanted to bring up. You know, why has Putin been able to stay in power for so long? I think 25 years. Well, it's really because he has no opposition. No one will run against him. I mean, people do run against him in the election, so they have an election, but all of his opponents are his friends. Anyone that seriously goes up against Putin usually mysteriously dies by accidentally falling out of a window, or maybe accidentally getting poisoned, or maybe accidentally getting shot in the back of the head. Most of the time, if you're against Putin, you need to leave the country quick, because your days are numbered. Whether you are a force in a political opposition, or a journalist, or an activist, you most likely would have left Russia, or you would now be dead. That is, unless you are Alexei Navalny. the only person that gives Putin a real challenge to leading the country. He started out as being the leading force against corruption in Russia, making videos of the lifestyle of Putin's buddies and making the people of Russia realize, hey, Putin is not really what he says he is. Many started to follow Alexiy, and then some more, and then a lot more. Eventually Putin realized this guy has got to go, like all the others that came before him. So in 2013, he was jailed for embezzlement, the man which investigated the Russian government for corruption and was sentenced for 5 years, basically for what he was investigating. He then decided he would run for president. So in 2017, Alexiy is nominated to run against Putin in the upcoming election. Multiple times he is put in jail leading up to that election and is poisoned while in jail, but he survives. He's denied the ability to run for president, of course, but vows to fight on. In 2020, he's on a plane back from Moscow, nearly dies from the same type of poison from before. He is rushed to Germany, where he is put in a coma for 2 weeks, but survives the poison attack. But after 5 months, he returns to Russia. He was arrested at the airport on charges he left the country while out on bail from his last arrest. Massive protests happened around Russia. Thousands are arrested. And Alexiy is kept in jail on the charge that he went to Germany to receive treatment to save his life from the poisoning. He then goes on a hunger strike. Protests swirl around Russia. Putin comes out and says Alexiy will be sentenced to 3.5 years. Then on March 2022, he is sentenced to additional 9 years for fraud, of which no one seems to know what the evidence is against him. And he is given another 19 years for being an extremist. Also a new law that anyone protesting for Alexiy is to be immediately arrested. Alexiy then disappears for several weeks and then reappears in one of the harshest prisons in the world, up one beyond the Arctic Circle. Just a few weeks ago, Alexiy gets a message out to get his people to vote against Putin in the upcoming election on March 17th by voting all at the same time and clogging up the lines. It's a powerful demonstration against Putin. Alexiy is seen on the video camera laughing and looking healthy. But that was last week. But on February 15th, while taking a walk, he fell over dead at age 47. How did he die? We don't know. When exactly? We don't know. Where's the body? No one knows. Is there an autopsy to show the cause of death? No one knows for sure. Did Putin have Alexei Navalny killed? Putin says no, but the world is saying, are you kidding me? Putin absolutely killed Alexei Navalny. I'm sure Alexei Navalny knew his days were numbered. He could have just stayed in Germany, but he didn't. He was the only true danger to Putin, and I'm sure he knew eventually Putin would have him killed. He was mysteriously sent to one of the farthest, most remote prisons in the world, far from his wife and the rest of the world to see him. His only possible way out of the prison was the only way to stop the war in Ukraine if someone were to kill Putin. But unfortunately, his life ended before that ever came to pass. Many around the world are mourning the death of Alexei. He was a symbol to many and the Russians as a possible end to what they call the murderous dictatorship of Vladimir Putin. But what will happen now with the movement of Alexei? Well, probably nothing. Most of the leaders of the movement have all had to leave Russia or be killed. Putin has now made it illegal to protest against him in Russia. There's not much anyone can do at this point except just wait until cancer or a bullet or a poison from one of his generals catches up to Putin. In any case, we have to say goodbye to Alexei Navalny. We have been talking about him here on the World News Jam for years. I used to say, I can't believe this guy is still alive. Alexei Navalny, dead at 47 years old. This is Eric Lecain on RJTV. You know, when you have some new shoes and a new dress and new eyelash extensions, but no one is inviting you to a party, you have all this nice stuff, but nowhere to wear it. Well, right now, North Korea has all kinds of new things: bombs, ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, a spy satellite. But what good is it if you don't have a real live war to actually fight in? Of course, Russia and Ukraine are in a war, shooting long missiles and using drones, and Israel and Hamas are in a war, killing all kinds of civilians, just blowing up everything. Even China looks like it may take a shot at Taiwan. Everyone's getting into the act. What about poor North Korea? It's been ironically at war since 1953, but as of now, all they can do is shoot test missiles into the ocean, then make up some propaganda story about how South Korea and the U.S. made them do it. Even their underground nuclear tests that cause small earthquakes have had to be done in secret. So if Kim Jong-un, the supreme ruler of North Korea, is suffering from some jealousy now from many others being at war, well, he has upped his game. For the last 70 plus years, North Korea has continued to say, we want to one day unify the two Koreas once again. Have one Korea, strong and powerful, under one ruler, and that ruler, of course, being Kim Jong-un. But South Korea is most likely never going to go for that. Even though North Korea has been one of the biggest militaries in the world, South Korea has friends, lots of friends. And if North Korea ever tried to forcefully unify the two Koreas on their own, well, no one would care how big their military was. They would most likely cease to exist. In other words, the world would gang up and obliterate them. So Kim Jong-un recently said, all right then, if there's no way to ever unify the Koreas with me as their only true leader and God of the people, then let's just forget all about that. From now on, South Korea is just another country to me, and they are our enemy. We will no longer seek reconciliation and reunification, and from this point on, South Korea is North Korea's permanent enemy. In other words, South Korea, not only are you not my friend or a strange family member, but as of now, you are my mortal enemy. In response, South Korea was like, well, okay. I mean, we kind of already thought about it that way, but okay. Now, many, especially in the U.S., are wondering if this means Kim is tired of always sitting in the last half of the news, wants to shine on the front page like Russia or Hamas. Many are wondering if he might one day pull the grenade pin and just say, what the heck, let's toss this thing in and see what blows up. So as Kim decided to ramp up his military on the border, to increase his testing fires and sending up satellites, many are wondering, does he have some kind of plan we don't know about? And with all of this new stuff he's putting on the border, is there the high possibility that they are hoping for a border misunderstanding where someone throws a tomato over the demilitarized zone and the other side retaliates with a nuclear missile? I mean, Kim is hoping for someone to accidentally throw that tomato. And also, why all of a sudden make this claim in 2024? After all these years, what's the reason? Does he have a new confidence because they have finally figured out how to make a nuclear weapon that flies? And he's ready to use it? I mean, why at this point reclassify South Korea as an enemy of the state unless you were going to do something? Something that will get you noticed, get you on the front page, maybe lots of clicks on Instagram. I'm just kidding, North Korea doesn't have Instagram. But reclassifying the relationship between the North and the South may actually just be the justification why Kim needs to build up his massive arsenal even more. If South Korea is now just another enemy, not part of Korea, he can say he needs to protect himself from the enemy on the border. I think part of this is really to do with how the U.S. is handling this. Every time Kim has upgraded the North, the U.S. steps in and gives the South something new and improved, so Kim has finally gotten to his breaking point. Maybe he thinks that if he changes his relationship status, he now has the carte blanche to make any weapon he wants. Will North Korea finally attack? Hard to believe he would do that because he knows that if he did, it would be the end of his regime and most likely his life. And at that point, his family name will just survive in Wikipedia. But then again, Who knows what's in Kim's head? Maybe he thinks he's been watching the Ukraine slapping around the mega giant Russia, and he thinks, hey, yo, why can't I do that? Maybe in the near future, if he keeps building up his nuclear arsenal, maybe he can. But just in case you're watching the World News Jam, Kim Jong-un, there's a big difference between the Ukrainians doing to Russia what might happen if you were to go up against the U.S. The U.S. is part of NATO, which means if you fire on South Korea, which the U.S. will defend, you might end up in a fight against many other countries. Well, maybe. Which leads us to another story from this week. What if the U.S. is no longer part of NATO? What if someone breaks the 70 years alliance of NATO? Last week, something hit us that maybe we didn't see coming, or maybe we saw it coming, just still can't believe it. Anyway, at a campaign rally in South Carolina, Donald Trump, the ex-president, made an interesting statement. As we know, Trump has been a big ally of Putin, and in being his BFF, he has criticized NATO in the past, but this week he'd said something that when he becomes president, he will not support countries that don't pay their share. He said, you didn't pay? You're a delinquent? No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage the Russians to do whatever the hell they want. Now, normally we would go, oh, that's just Trump saying whatever he needs to in order to get the crowd riled up. But this has had an interesting fallout in that many that were listening were not all in the U.S. I mean, the Republican frontrunner for president is saying he might not back up NATO allies if they were attacked by Russia. And also he's saying that he would encourage Russia to attack members of NATO. Now, as of now, the Ukraine is able to hold off the Russians from taking over the country via help from the U.S. and, of course, some European countries. But if Trump becomes president of the U.S., all of a sudden, he cuts off the Ukrainian weapons supply and allows Russia to win the war, what would that mean? If Trump vows not to back up its allies in NATO, would Putin try to take back another country that got their independence after the fallout of the Soviet Union? And what about Poland, that Putin alludes that he may want to take over? So what are the members of NATO thinking now? Is this the end of NATO as we know it? I mean, Trump doesn't seem to understand how NATO works as far as paying. It's not like a club you join where if you don't pay your dues, you have a military budget that's 2% of your GDP. Now, obviously, the U.S. budget is way beyond any other countries, and some countries just don't have a big budget. But there are no actual dues per se, no actual NATO armed forces. It's an alliance, the countries who have militaries. Now, several of these current militaries are not at that 2% marker, but supposedly by this year they will be at that point. Others will be close behind. Like I said, the U.S. has the largest overall military in the world and clearly is the most sophisticated. Not every country is like that. The U.S. didn't seem to mind before, so the other countries with smaller militaries, just as long as they were friends of our friends and enemies of our enemies, the U.S. allows countries to rely on them just as long as they remain in the alliance. But if the U.S. were to pull out of NATO or say, we will no longer back any countries that are not at that 2% mark, well, that could create a major repercussions around the world. You might think Russia would welcome such a development, but actually China and North Korea might have more to gain. If the U.S. was to sever the NATO alliance, China would now be closer to an equal with the U.S. military. And if Russia were to want to move into Poland, it would give China the opening it might need to finally move on Taiwan. Same as with North Korea. If the South feels very comfortable with the U.S. because they are backed by NATO, but if they were to go away and the U.S. decided to worry only about itself, North Korea would, I think, take clear advantage of that situation If you were to look at a chart of NATO, the U.S. basically is around 68% of the alliance as far as the military. Without the U.S., there is effectively no NATO, really. So that line that the ex-U.S. president said about not only not backing the NATO alliance, but encouraging Russia to go ahead and attack, might maybe have given other nations the idea that maybe there's a chance for me, if the U.S. changes its policy, maybe I can take over some other countries. The world changes as fast as you can blink. You know, if I could look into the future and see what a map looks like, I wonder what it would look like. This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us. Speaking of Sundays, last Sunday was the Super Bowl. Something like 120 million people watched it. It used to be the most watched show in history was the moon landing, and now it's Super Bowl 2024. Maybe because of the number of football fans and maybe because of Taylor Swift. But whatever it was, a lot of people tuned in. And to make matters even better, it was a good game. Lots of drama, with overtime and last-second plays. And of course, Taylor Swift. It's everything a TV network would want. But with every up, I guess there's always a down. This one came after the game with a big celebration for the people of Kansas City. There was a parade for the fans of Kansas City. Players all showed up and came down the street, later took pictures with fans and signed autographs. But right after the parade, the players went into the Union Station to meet the fans when that all-familiar sound in the U.S. rang out. The pop, pop, pop in the seconds when people thought, it's fireworks. And then the screams when people realize it's not fireworks. And then the running, and then the chaos. Yes, it was the sound of gunshots. Now, there were around 1 million people at this event. So, if you can imagine that sound and 1 million people reacting. Also, once you hear it, everyone in the U.S. knows what is most likely about to happen. There is someone with a mental problem and a military weapon, and some people in this crowd are about to die. It's the U.S. we know now. The people ran out and the police ran in. The mayhem you can see, there was a man running and tackling someone in the middle of all this. It ended up being a football fan just tackling one of the possible shooters and holding him till the police arrived. Now, was this a terrorist act? Was this a MAGA person who hates Taylor Swift? Was it your standard young white male who is mad at the world and needs to be noticed? Actually, maybe it was none of those. Really may have just been a couple of kids. A fight broke out. In any case, someone had a gun and 22 people ages 8 to 47 were injured, but most of the badly hurt and shot were kids. Unfortunately, it seemed a DJ from a local radio station was in the wrong place at the wrong time and lost her life when one of the bullets struck her. Her name was Lisa Lopez. Another man was shot in the ankle, and his son shot in the foot, and his girlfriend shot in the calf. The police have arrested several people. 2 young boys seem to be at the center of the shooting and have been arrested. Also a man who was drunk and picked up the gun after the shooting. He was arrested. Now he doesn't seem to be involved in the shooting, but he picked up the gun and walked away with it. Maybe he was arrested for just being dumb. You know, it's funny, or not funny, but this shooting happened to fall on the exact same day as the 6th anniversary of the Parkland school shooting, which also involved kids, but of course 17 people lost their lives there. But very much like in the shooting, aftermath is the same. Many famous people, politicians come out and say, our thoughts and prayers go out with the families, etc., etc. And then there'll be the donations. Even Taylor Swift put up $100,000 for the family of the dead woman. There's nothing wrong with that. But I can already tell you now the politicians will ask that question, should we do something about gun violence in the U.S.? And the answer is, yes, you should. I mean, the question should be, How do a couple of Kansas City kids get hold of a couple of handguns? Their answer is because they can. It's easy. Kansas City, Missouri is one of the easiest places in the U.S. to get a gun. According to my research, the National Rifle Association, you don't even need a permit in that state to obtain one. In fact, you don't need a permit to carry one. President Joe Biden passed some legislation recently to make it harder to get a gun, but just the other week, at one of those NRA events, Donald Trump said if he will roll back any gun legislation that Biden was able to pass when he becomes president. Just after the attack, Biden said, "It is time to act. That's where I stand. I ask the country to stand with me, to make your voice heard in Congress so we can finally act to ban assault weapons, to limit high-capacity magazines, strengthen background checks, keep guns out of the hands of those who have no business owning them or handling them." Well, okay, that's pretty good, I guess. But contrast that with what the Republican governor said, who was at the event. He said, "Thanks to the professionalism of our security officers and first responders, Teresa and I and our staff are safe and secure." End of quote. Nothing about Missouri having some of the weakest gun laws in the country, ranking 38th in the gun safety laws. The mayor, who's a Democrat, said, "Parades, rallies, schools, movies, it seems like almost nothing is safe." He went on to say the city's law enforcement agencies were unable to prevent the incident despite the presence of more than 800 officers, including federal agents. But it's hard to fault the police officers here. You had 1 million people and a couple of kids with some handguns. Fight breaks out, one of the kids challenges the other to a fight, and a gun is drawn. Sounds like an old Western movie, doesn't it? I'm just saying, unless the police were standing right there, it's kind of hard to stop. So another day, another shooting. If this had not been the most watched Super Bowl in history, we probably would not have even heard about this shooting. 1 person dead and 22 injured. In the U.S., that won't even make the top 100 list of gun shootings. This is Eric Lecain on the Jam. Let's get to some animal news this week. In my home state of North Carolina, the aquarium there's a stingray named Charlotte. Charlotte's also the biggest city of the state, so everyone loves the female stingray named Charlotte. But the thing is, in the aquarium, there are no male stingrays, none. So how did Charlotte get pregnant? It's not like the other story we did a few months back where the male and female monkeys were separated and the female somehow got pregnant and later they found a tiny hole in the barrier. This is not that. There are no males in the whole facility. Now the ray, which is between 12 and 16 years old, had a noticeable growth on her stomach. Officials at the aquarium at first thought it might be cancer. But after the ultrasound, they found one thing they never expected: eggs, 4 of them, in her belly. But how could she be pregnant? So the scientists began to investigate. First of all, there was a slight possibility of interspecies mating. They noticed bite marks on Charlotte's back, shark bite marks. Turns out there are 2 white spotted bamboo sharks in the tank with Charlotte named Larry and Moe. Now, when male sharks mate, they tend to bite the female. Could it be that Larry or Moe had been secretly mating with Charlotte and gotten her pregnant? Is that even possible? Of course, when the babies come out, we will know for sure. I'm going to guess it would be a little spotted shark ray. But another scientist has said, no, this is not possible. Even if they did mate, there is no chance of baby shark rays coming out. Their anatomies are not compatible, nor is their DNA. Turns out there's another explanation. Parthenogenesis, a phrase from the Greeks which literally translates to virgin creation. Parthenogenesis is a rare form of asexual reproduction in which a female produces an embryo without fertilization by a male sperm. Indeed, a smaller cell known as a polar body, which forms at the same time as the egg and contains DNA similar to the mother's, merges with the fertile egg. This creates the offspring that are similar to the mother, but not exact clones. Turns out this happens in several species, including condors and crocodiles. But it turns out that in sharks and rays, it's totally not uncommon. However, if Charlotte has babies, it'll be the first virgin birth of a round stingray. Even though several still believe Larry and Moe had something to do with this. The scientists from Mott Marine Laboratory said, I give a shark the same odds of being the father that I would give Elvis or Bigfoot of being the father. And that would be 0. Well, for sure it's not Elvis. In any case, Charlotte is expected to give birth in the next 2 weeks. Everyone is waiting patiently at the aquarium to see just what comes out. They will move her to a much larger tank to accommodate the babies, equipped with cameras, and it will be a real event. I wonder if they will ever figure out how to incorporate parthenogenesis in humans. Wonder how many women would take advantage of that, or would all women take advantage of that? One more animal story centers around donkeys, the special child of the horse family. In general, donkeys are very funny creatures. Their ears don't really match the size of their head, and they don't run particularly fast, and the sound that comes out of their mouth is hysterical. But the one thing about donkeys is that they are easy to train and very strong. Even though they don't have the speed and beauty of a horse, they can walk up mountains with huge amounts of weights on their backs. In Africa especially, donkeys are responsible for many people's livelihood. They can carry enormous loads of water across the dry desert to customers who would ordinarily have to carry it themselves. But the problem lately is that donkeys are being stolen. Not because someone wants to increase his water sales, but something much more popular and pricier than water, donkey skin. This is becoming a major problem across Africa. Donkey thefts are way up in the past year. But why donkey skin? It's not like fur or rabbit or cheetah. You never hear of anyone showing off their donkey skin coat. They are stealing the skins not to wear, but to make medicine. In China, of course, they believe that donkey skin has health-enhancing and youth-preserving properties. They will take the skin and boil it down to extract a gelatin substance from it, which then can be converted into a powder, pill, liquid, added to food. The Donkey Sanctuary, which has campaigned against the trade of donkey skin since 2017, estimates that globally at least 5.9 million donkeys are slaughtered every year to supply this drug, although they admit it's hard to really tell just how many donkeys really have died. Most of those donkeys come from Africa, which is where most of the donkeys live. The problem is that some countries, it's legal to take the skin of a donkey and sell it, which is why there is now a problem of donkeys being moved across the border only to be killed on the other side of the border in a different country in Africa. Between the years of 2016 and 2019, half of the population of donkeys in Kenya were killed just for their skin. These are the same animals that carry people, goods, water, and food, the backbone of poor rural communities. So the scale and rapid growth of the skin trade has alarmed campaigners and experts and has moved many people in Kenya to take part in an anti-skin trade demonstration. Currently, there's a call at the annual African Union Summit, February 17th and 18th, which is right now, to initiate a ban on donkey skin across the African countries. So, why doesn't China have its own donkeys? Well, they actually did. However, like other resources in China, it disappeared. As the needs and popularity of the gelatin extract from the donkey skin increased, China couldn't produce enough donkeys to meet the demand. So they began sourcing these skins from Africa and Brazil. The business of skins went from $3.2 billion in 2013 to $7.8 billion in 2022. So the question remains, if you are in an impoverished country where money is needed for basics such as food, going to school, do you keep your donkey for farming, to make money, to send your child to school, or do you sell the skin in one-time big donkey skin cash out? I'm sure they know what the donkey would probably say. This is Lecain on the World News Jam. By the way, How are things going in Israel? Aren't they working on a peace deal, a ceasefire? Well, they are, but clearly it's not going well. It's almost like the father making the two brothers sit in a room and work things out. And even though they are sitting there, no matter what anyone says, they still want to kill each other. Right now, talks in Cairo or with the governments of Egypt and Qatar are desperately trying to find some kind of common ground to get these two sides talking. The biggest problem seems to be with the hostages. Israel demands the hostages be returned before negotiations continue, but Hamas knows that if they release the hostages, then they have nothing. They can't beat Israel's massive firepower. They have the hostages and they have propaganda. Hamas has laid out its demands, which Israel claims are delusional. They include the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners, a full withdrawal of Israel forces, and an end to the war. Israel has another idea for ending the war. Hamas hand over all the hostages and Israel will occupy Gaza. Right now, Israel is planning to invade Rafah. This is the southernmost city in Gaza where some 1.5 million Palestinians have fled to try and escape the war. The Prime Minister Netanyahu says he will enter that area no matter what happens in the negotiations. When the war first started in Israel, it told the Palestinians to go to the south so that they would not be killed in the attacks. However, now Israel is planning to make a move on the exact area the Palestinians were told to go. The problem is that Netanyahu is becoming more and more unpopular in his own country. As many have said that before, Netanyahu, he needs this war. He needed it to start. He needs it to continue. It's his only reason for claiming he needs to stay in office. Right now, many protesters want to move up the 2026 election in Israel to a sooner date in order to vote him out of office. Even people from within Netanyahu's own party want to have an election now. But the prime minister says this is a bad idea, that it will further divide his country. Meanwhile, Hamas is blaming the lack of progress in a ceasefire squarely on the shoulders of Israel. This week, they threatened to completely walk out of the talks unless Israel will allow relief supplies to be brought into the northern part of Gaza. Right now, people in Gaza are just as worried about the food and water and medicine as they are the bombs and the bullets. One of the big problems are the leaders. These two small pieces of desert seem to need the war to continue in order to keep their power alive. The fact that people are on the Gaza side dying daily seems to be a low priority on the list of the leaders. Yes, I know 1,200 Israelis died, some 28,000 Palestinians. And the fault of these deaths really looks to be at the feet of just a handful of men. You know, the U.S. President Joe Biden is telling Israel that it should not invade Rafah. But the Israeli Prime Minister has been clear that no matter what happens, he will invade that area no matter what. And the people must just move. He has said again, even this week, that there will be no two-state solution. There will be no independent Palestinian state. But the rest of the world seems to be leaning into that direction of a Palestinian state. It's the only way to bring peace. So here we are. The people on both sides seem to clearly want peace. It's enough already for them. Most of Hamas leaders are not even in Gaza anymore. I understand what happened a few months ago, but the Israelis need to understand that the attack is not on just that day. It's a strategy to create exactly what's happening now. The world is slowly turning on the support of Israel in this war because they can see exactly what has happened, what is happening, what is going to happen. Netanyahu is starting to exhibit traits of Putin. The Russian people don't want their war, and the Israel don't want this one. But the ones in charge need to keep their power alive, and to do that, they may need to keep this war going. Well, that's our show for this Sunday evening. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Please join us next week here on the World News Jam on 𝗪ＣRJ Radio Bandito and RJTV. So for me, Eric Lecain, and everyone here at the World News Jam, please be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.